13. Mr. Rishi Moneytree by John Knox. He looked like a birch tree in winter, tall, straight and slightly uneasy. His thin arms were gaily outstretched as if he were casting gold coins upon the wind like leaves. He was tightly wrapped in a dark suit from which his head, and particularly his nose, protruded quite hawk-like. His speech was as carefully tailored as his suit, and he spoke with a slight lisp, an affectation acquired at his private school. He was, of course, head boy, for he was clever and assured, without being in the least rebellious. Good at games, too, for he was supple and could bend with the wind. He'd gone on to make money in the city, and now he found himself appointed Chancellor of Her Majesty's Exchequer. To everyone's surprise, not least himself, he began to display a little rebelliousness. In point of fact, a large treasure trove of rebelliousness. He could be seen at the window of 11 Downing Street, striding carefully up and down, mouthing the words, "We will do whatever it takes, whatever it takes, whatever it takes." On day one of his new job, he announced to the astonished staff that he was abandoning their accustomed austerity and gently adopting the policies of Her Majesty's opposition. He would do whatever it takes to save the NHS, the railways, the airlines, the workers, the poor, indeed the very nation, from the vicissitude of the coronavirus. And moreover, he would tell that oaf next door that if he did not adopt this new scheme of things, he would jolly well replace him. Having imparted this revolutionary message to his staff, Mr. Moneytree paused slightly, surprised at his own assertiveness, squared his shoulders, waved his branches, and watched as gold coins rose into the air like confetti. Number 14. Jacob Rees Mogg by Brian Goldfarb. Is it not appropriate that the Member of Parliament we are considering in these lines, the person entitled, sadly not entirely satirically, as the Minister for the 19th century, this you understand in the 21st century, should represent North Somerset, a largely rural part of England? He is, of course, a Conservative, although the sobriquet Tory, as he would have been so called in the century to which he rightly belongs, is more fitting. Further, he has progressed in a mere 10 years from right-wing gadfly, opposing gay marriage, positive discrimination, and much else that his party has, however reluctantly, accepted in the 21st century, to the joint posts of Leader of the House and Lord President of the Council, despite being pictured lolling, there is no other word in our lexicon for this posture, on the front bench of our venerable Parliament. Our hero, if such he is, progressed to these exalted heights via, perhaps inevitably, Eton and Trinity, Oxford. From there he made his fortune via forays into the hedge fund market, whatever that is, and other such ventures, with such success that he became independently wealthy before entering Parliament. Having married well and happily, he proceeded to benefit his children with, inevitably, classical names such as, to give but 3 examples of the 6, Anselm Charles, Alfred Wulfric, and possibly inevitably his 6th, the name Sixtus Dominic. Would it be too unkind to ascribe this tendency to outdated flamboyance to being largely raised, by his own admission, by a nanny, and being the scion of a noted and notable editor of the great organ of record, the Times of London? It is for you, the reader, to decide in what follows whether your humble author has painted an accurate picture of an important, but not sadly inevitable, character. Number 15. Charles Spender by Vanessa Ray. Meet Mr. Charles Spender. Oh, I'm sorry, you already have. He epitomises today's new-moneyed self-made men, although the less charitable may say that he is not unlike one of their very own projects, a piece of work in progress. Charles will be the empty vessel holding court at any swanky gathering, an eloquent orator, using braggadocio and volume to boast and convince you of his exceptional business prowess, his net worth, the many monumental achievements, and of course his successes as an entrepreneur. This theatrical silver-tongued mannequin is but hot air and bluster, full of more bonhomie than his quaffing wine, a fake label bottle of Chateau Margaux. This grotesque folly of white is no more real than the caricature of Loads of Money, a 1980s character, a sad echo that should remain in the past. A minnow ardently swimming upstream in a bid to grab the main chance, held back only by the walls of his inflatable paddling pool, the size of his ego, his world, his life. The freckle-faced twin boys he still believes to have sired are already sad, obnoxious reflections of him. Now it's showtime, and the circus begins. They dangle and dance upon his wiry frame, clothed in matching Armani tuxedos, like baubles weighing heavily on an already wilting Christmas tree. He bombards their innocent cranium sponges with grandiose ideas that they too can aspire to be like Daddy. Anything, have anything. Winning is everything, losing is not an option. The performance done, he leans in for his reward, but already they recoil. His stubble repugnant, rough and itchy against their faces. It hides a weak, botox taut chin, the colour of overripe mangoes, a puppet they have already learnt to play. Number 16. Dr. Blunt by Aimee Chan. That will be all, he said. The patient looked bemused and confused, and she didn't move from her seat. What didn't she understand? He stood up to indicate the consultation was over. If you stay this fat, you may as well stop coming to see me as soon you'll be dead. Dr. Blunt held open his office door to shoo out the suitably chastened patient. He slammed the door behind her with a smug sense of satisfaction. After 30 years of practice, Dr. Blunt did not believe in mollycoddling foods. Facts were facts. His medical advice was clear, and even the worst simpleton could understand it. His time was valuable and not to be wasted on those without the basic common sense or intelligence to make the correct choices. Dr. Blunt carried this inflated self-importance everywhere, protruding in front of him like his distended pot belly. The hypocrisy of his obvious plumpness as he berated his patients was completely lost on him. Over the dinner table he would ask his wife if she had seen the latest global news, and before she could proffer him an opinion, he would launch into a lecture that kept her mute for the entirety of the meal. When walking past building sites on his morning walks, sometimes even entering them without permission or reason, he strode confidently like an inspector, hands behind his back, kicking at posts and knocking on walls. He was particularly fond of pointing out flaws, poor choices that his secretary made in her presence for her grandchildren, advising strangers against finishing books they were reading next to him on the train, and offering recipe improvements that his eagle palate had detected as he brazenly sauntered into restaurant kitchens. In short, Dr. Blunt thought he knew everything, and he was insufferable. 17. Neil Sharington by Carrie-Anne Taylor. He did not mind that when he married his wife, she did not take his name, instead choosing to keep that of her father's. He knew that, like himself, she would give what she had to him, and what they had, they would give to others. The Sharingtons, or the Charlaws, or the Tatons, as they were known to friends, were both doers and givers. Oh, and he was the most kind-hearted man, Neil Sharington, slow to anger, with a stoic-like temperance, generous with his time and his energies. A craftsman, a painter, a builder, a maker, a listener, a sage, a most talented man for these difficult modern times. A calmness pervaded him, and a wisdom which belied his mere 40 years. A deepness of soul and a warm glint eschewed from his grey-blue eyes, a wry smile and his infamous Roman nose, and the wobbly chin which he had inherited from his paternal side, made for quite a striking chap. He stood at 6 feet, and was lean but no longer stick-like as he had been in his youth. Age had rounded his features. He was composed and peaceful. Some might think that his reserved ways meant that he was lonely, but on the contrary, he was not. He had many friends, but he chose to shun the big parties and social gatherings, preferring to spend quality time with those he saw as equal to him, not in wealth or education, but in their humanity. He saw people as simply that, people. He held no judgments and would not engage in idle gossip, preferring to act and listen rather than talk and stand idle. His benevolent nature saw him helping those less fortunate than himself, and not even once did he ask for thanks. Number 18, Nowhereman by Diana Lilford. With his wide, white, toothy grin and skin as shiny and polished as ebony, he looked for all the world like some beautiful bookend out of a colonial auction catalogue. A ray of African sunshine. A dreamer, the tiniest, most compact of beings, hands and feet as small as any child, a sartorial dresser, a large metal cross dangling from his neck, hair closely cropped to a heart-shaped line around his forehead. He was a nowhere man, a man with no papers, homeless and illegal in a foreign land. No future, and a distant, far-away past. How can anyone smile at so bleak a present, you might wonder. But smile he did, and to catch and every gardening task he brought a vigour and enthusiasm that fair shocked you into humbleness. Mighty hedges clipped to rectangular perfection, gravel raked to smoothness, lawn edges clipped to even seams. He literally raced between his tasks, a ladder caught firmly under arm. A small man, so positive, so optimistic, he almost levitated above the earth. And behind it all, he had a dream. I want to be a farmer, he declared. I'm saving for that day. But how could he? A wife arrived from home, a new baby on the way. A dangerous life, a cousin stabbed to death as she left a nightly waitress job. A brother dead from asthma, and each must be returned home, flown back for burial. It was the tribal way. So each and every time, the savings were depleted. And then a virus that corralled him to a tiny tin shack in a lawless shanty wilderness. Enforced isolation, no work, no pay. What has he left? Something we might all have forgotten. Faith. God will protect me because he made us, and he will protect us all. Number 19. The Admirable Major Vinton Hall by Mavis Ellis. Throughout the whole of his adult life, Charles Dickens encountered veterans of Waterloo, as well as those who had fought in the Crimean War, and I deem it an immense pity that he never met one of our own modern-day soldiers, Major Vinton Hall. But why Major Hall, one might ask? Did he have a connection with the Falklands War, perhaps? The Gulf War? Pray permit me to explain that Major Hall seldom spoke of his wartime experience, and never made headline news. But he was a courageous soldier, and his family are inordinately proud of him. They are convinced that he had many stories to tell. No doubt Charles Dickens would have been keen to uncover them. Major Hall died deeply lamented at dawn on Friday, the 8th of May, 2020, aged 104. He was still driving a car at the age of 99 and only went into care in Bodmin, Cornwall, 2 months prior to his death. During the Second World War, he served in the Royal Engineers. He and his wife Dorothy were married for 77 years. 5 days after they were joined in holy matrimony, he was sent to Burma, and they did not see one another again for 3 years. After the war, he helped in the rebuilding of England and was chief architect for Exeter. He followed all the commemorative events which were planned for the 75th anniversary of VE Day on television, and would have been proud to learn that on the day of his demise, the 8th of May, 2020, the entire nation fell silent at 11 a.m. to mark the anniversary of the end of the hostilities in Europe after the Nazi surrender in 1945. Number 20. Mr. Hollyworth by Patrick Ost. Of the whole rich tapestry of pseudo-challenges and donation nominations and whatever else besides was doing the virtual rounds at this sorry old time, none of these ISO inspirations impressed Mr. Hollyworth one bit. He was never in the least tempted to stoop, except for a brief moment of weakness when he debated posting a response to the ubiquitous sharing of top 10 quarantunes. But this was but a fleeting sensation, born of a compulsion to educate the whole rotten crowd in what he called real music, and chide them for having less insight combined than he had in his spindly little finger. Not a single bright ember of community at this time stoked the fires of Hollyworth's bitter heart. When the nation poured from its locked doors one Sunday eve to stand afoot and applaud the NHS, Hollyworth remained inside, welded to his chair, rolling his eyes and sneering his lip in cold disdain at the putrid attempt of people who, in his opinion, took part in this sort of nonsense only because they could appear to care, without actually inconveniencing themselves. Oh, what a miserable chop he was! Wherein good, except to belittle the efforts of others? Wherein did he pleasure, except in others' misfortune? Wherein was he helpful, but to himself? Wherein social, but in no things? Wherein piteous, but to his own weary woes? Wherein resentful, at all times? Wherein loving, but in nothing? And yet, on his pristine laptop, the Twitter feed was always open, and the Facebook page eternally refreshed. And perhaps even more revealing, each week, when the volunteer girl came to drop off his prescription, his eyes betrayed him, lingering on her vanishing form, while he, in spite of himself, wondered if there was aught he could have said to extend her stay a while. 21. Mr. Dusucre by Deborah Sidaway. Mr. Dusucre, sir, a man of Excel spreadsheets, holding companies, dividends and tax-efficient corporate structures. A man for whom offshore trusts should not be spoken of, while maintaining a home in the sheltering warmth of an ocean island so that no wintry weather should chill him. But a man who is British, who speaks for the undoubted benefits of Brexit as he sips his pineapple mojito from a sunbed on his yacht. A man of charity and industry, sir, and soon to be a sir indeed, anticipating knighthood for his services to Her Majesty, for his benevolence and charitable donations, all to respectable and worthy charitable institutions of which Mr. Dusucre, sir, is chairman. A man who proceeds upon the basis that profit is profit, and losses are not to be countenanced unless they can reduce his taxable income, who tells those who toil for him to show him nothing but profits or evidence of how those profits are to be made. A man not high in stature, but tall in his principles, smiling beneficently through the perfectly elegant mane of his woke bro beard. This man, sir, is Mr. Du Sucre. 22. Annabel Sprogg by Catherine Symonds. "You wretched child, Annabel Sprogg," was the phrase that had become most associated with the freckled, fuzzy, auburn-haired, 4-foot thing. It seemed to most that she had set about one lifetime goal, that was to do precisely the opposite of any rule she encountered. For it was she, and no one else, that had stole into the construction site on Greymore High Street on the way to school one morning and made a blockade in the road from bricks that she had found, causing the school bus to be late. And all of this to evade the chemistry exam that morning. Heavens! It was also she who had made Lucinda Clearwater cry, telling her that her hair looked like fat cigars after Lucinda had spent 3 hours the previous evening carefully curling it in rags. All in all, Annabel Sprogg had received no less than 26 detentions that year, and it was only March. But her naughtiness had heightened of late, and she would be repeatedly scolded by the teachers. "Don't you know we're in the middle of a pandemic, girl? Behave, like every other one of your classmates." But the truth was thus. Every evening after school, Annabel would dawdle home, her dirty uniform smelling a little worse each day. She would throw sticks at the ducks when she passed the pond. She would shout the wickedest names she could think of at pedestrians. And sometimes she would even run into the road to scare the drivers, because she wanted someone, anyone, to hate her, to feel something towards her. More than anything, she wanted to avoid going home to Mr. and Mrs. Sprogg. And if the rumours at school were true, school might be closing for a very long time, and she would be left at home with them. "23. Lil by Valerie Moyses. Lil was a maid at a seaside hotel. She admitted to being 70, but was really older. Although uneducated, what she called books were the women's magazines she read regularly, she was nobody's fool. Lil was skinny but wiry and the most laid-back person. Her small round face was always smiling gently, as if remembering a favourite joke. She did not do stress, and she ignored bullies and bosses. She had nothing to lose by her attitude, since she had no money worries. She was a widow, childless, with a pension and a council house. She not only went on working for the companionship, her prized possession was her green leather coat, which she considered a status symbol. She worked as a char lady all her life. In spite of her frail appearance, she worked fiendishly without seeming to. She had a dozen rooms to clean and beds to make, but for all her years, she often finished her whole day's work by 3 p.m., with time to pop out for a fag. She was the only maid who ever managed to polish her floors, which she did for fun. Lil sounds like a paragon, working like a slave for a pittance, but she had one besetting sin. You wouldn't say she stole, she just helped herself to oddments. She liked fancy hair clips, but mostly she liked the guests' indigestion remedies. Every time she found orange squash and Alka-Seltzer in the same room, she would take them and mix them. She probably overdosed herself constantly, but she never did herself any harm. Lil was a free spirit. She answered to nobody and always did exactly as she pleased. She never argued, never got upset. She was the most calm and easygoing soul, contented, at peace with the world. 24. Davy Boy Plumber by Natasha Weidler. Davy Boy's old mum called him her wanderlust kid, This was because Davy Boy grew up with an insatiable wanderlust for the world. He'd often display his nostalgia for the South East London fairgrounds of his 1970s youth and the friends he made who worked the rides. Now in his 40s, he was a kind and loving soul, showing a cheeky side by nailing Sid James' lusty trademark cackle to a T. "Hey, Esme," he'd text and typically sign off with "Love from Sid Roper" or "Love from your Sydney Bliss," using much-loved double entendres from "Carry On Loving" and "Carry On Camping." A distinctive figure, portly, stooping and bespectacled with a kindly face. When he wasn't falling over and rolling in the middle of the road when dashing across, he'd be reeling off hilarious stories of his youth, explaining the unfortunate incidents that paid him driving, a clumsy figure that his first scrape literally came when briefly steering too close to the left. His car subsequently caught a parked car as he drove along. Petrified and shaking like a leaf, he promptly drove himself to the nearest police station to hand himself in. The coppers laughed Davy Boy out of the station. The next incident, and the one that proved fatal to his car, occurred when he timidly edged his car out very slowly from the side road. His view was obscured by parked cars, but before he knew it, his bonnet was taken swiftly off at quick speed by a lady driver coming down the hill of that road. Davy Boy's wanderlust, and not to mention his nerves, was swiftly spent when it came to cars, and he never drove again, except maybe for the occasional fairground bumper ride.